Hello, Brandon at MBI. These are your carburetors, and I'm going to put a test on them for you. As you can see, we got a cold engine and no temp on the gauge there. Got a cold engine. I've got my hands on the exhaust, and so I'm going to go over a few things first. These carburetors have been fully machined. All mating surfaces have been machined. New butterflies, new throttle shafts. The butterfly shafts and the bores in the carburetors have been made plumb to each other, which they weren't in the first place from the factory. We got bushings on the throttle shafts. The idle mixture screws have been, idle mixture screw ports have been machined. All new factory gaskets have been used, which you can tell by the fact that they're red. Aftermarket gaskets are black. All the plating is cadmium like original. Got new attaching points for your ball sockets on your throttle linkage. And trying to think. Let's see, several important things to remember in terms of installing the carburetors. I'll send you instructions, but be sure to follow the instructions in terms of mounting the carburetors to the intake manifold, where there's a wave washer that goes between the body of the carburetor and the rubber gasket, the thick rubber gasket that goes against the intake. There's that wave washer acts as a limit stop and tells you how far down to snug the bolts for the carburetors. Be sure to install the carburetors loosely on the engine, and then take your air log, your big air log, slip it in place in front of these, slip it in place onto the carburetors, then tighten your carburetors and then slip your air log off. That way you'll be able to install your air log conveniently, because if you don't do that, these things have enough movement up and down and left to right that you will install them, snug them all down, get everything all taken care of, and then test drive, and then come back, and the last thing you do is put your air log in place, and if you don't have these things lined up, your air log is not going to fit. Be sure to use the support rod that goes underneath the carburetors to support the air log, which attaches to the carburetors. Otherwise, you got too much weight hanging off the side of the engine, and it's really detrimental to the carburetors. Also, make sure you have good motor mounts. The easiest way to tell if you don't have good motor mounts is you've got your air log installed right here, and as your air log transitions around to the air filter, it crosses the top of the firewall, and you should be able to put your fingers underneath the air log and above the firewall. And if you can't get your fingers underneath there, then you've got collapsed motor mounts, and your air log ends up sitting on top of the firewall and supporting the engine, and then the weight of the engine is on the carburetors. Again, not a good idea. Your fuel, let's see, also, when installing these carburetors, installing the fuel line, be sure to use two wrenches, one to stabilize the fuel fitting and the other one to move the swivel fitting on your fuel line. You do not want to wrench on this one while this one and without stabilizing this one. Now, your carburetors are the latest and greatest iteration. You can see here you get this very wide boss for the fuel inlet to screw into. That's the latest and greatest iteration, and on the bottom you'll see that you have a very large boss that helps reinforce the flange of the carburetor to where it bolts to the intake manifold. Fuel filtration is really important. The original fuel filter is miserable. I suggest an extra inline fuel filter after the factory filter and before the fuel pump. If you see any what looks like red sand in your original fuel filter, it's not red sand, it's rust, and that's going to get into the idle jets, and I'm going to pull one out right now. This is the idle jet right here. And if you ever lose idle, it's because the idle jet has a little bit of grit, and I don't even know if you can see it or not on camera, but right in the center right here there is actually a hole about the size of the diameter of a wire of a or maybe a hair almost. Actually it's a G55, and that means it's 0.55 millimeters, so it's pretty damn teeny. I don't know what's that, about 30 thousandths. Anyway, if the car will not idle, but you can blip the throttle and it'll run above idle, it's because G55 is clogged. One or both of them are clogged. Now, it's an easy thing to undo. Unscrew it, blow it out, and you're ready to rock and roll. So that's why fuel filtration is very important. Clean fuel is critical on these cars. So is running them regularly. There is a reason they have a priming lever on the original fuel pump. That's so that after the car sits for a week or two, you pop the hood, pump the fuel lever, the lever on the fuel pump, and make sure you got fuel into the carburetors, so that all you have to do is come in and blip the throttle a couple of times. You activate the choke, and that is one of the hardest things to do on these cars, is to get the choke to operate correctly. Alright, and that means I'm going to have to, that one's a little stiff, so we're going to work on that. Anyway, and you just come in, you choke it, and I'm going to hit the switch, see what we got. Depending upon the ambient temperature, right now it's about 85 out, but depending on your ambient temperature, the customer, the owner, the driver can keep the choke activated whilst driving the car, because as you can see, all the choke does is move the butterfly, but it also physically moves the throttle linkage. So you're actually choking at the same time you're operating the throttle, essentially. And what we're going to do before we can adjust anything is we got to warm up the engine. Starting to get some temperature. Thermostat's about to open. Should get up to 160 and then open. And there it goes. Now we're up to temperature. Alright. If for any odd reason somebody comes in and screws around with your settings, your initial setting on the idle mixture screw is screw it in until it snugs down, until it stops, and back it out 1.5 turns. And when I say screw it down until it snugs, you can actually do it with your fingers, but you do not crank this thing down as tight as it can go and then back off. Doing that does nothing but distorts the port inside the carburetor and ruins the carburetors. So you should even be able to do this with your fingers, but you will not probably have that ever happen to you. But just remember, as a baseline starting point, do not screw this down tight with a screwdriver. Just down until you feel just a smidge of resistance and back off 1.5 turns. The second barrel mixture screw is a dummy. It has been blocked off, and so do not touch these, do not mess with these. There's nothing that can be done with these idle mixture screws on the second barrel, because the car does not idle on the second barrel. Now then, once you, the same thing would be true for the idle screw. Screw it down until it touches the lever, the carburetor lever, then down 1.5 turns, and that will give you your basic setting for starting the car. I recommend a synchrometer, available online, very reasonably priced, like $50, and they do a great job. Now what we're looking for here is uniformity from carburetor to carburetor. First things first, the car idles on the first barrel, so the second barrel at idle should not be pulling any air. And here's our needle right here, and you can see it didn't even move right there on the second barrel here. And it moved just a smidge on the second barrel, on the first carburetor. So that's really good. For what it's worth, the factory would produce carburetors that would be running around 2.5 or 3. Excuse me, I'm getting a dry throat here. Next, what you're going to do is disconnect your linkage, and we're going to find out. Got to find out if there's. Got to make sure that we are adjusting the carburetors independently of each other. Okay. Alright. That's doing fine right there. That's I may even have to hold on to that. And the reason for that is you don't want to adjust carburetors that are being affected by throttle linkage, which is very important, because there's like 7 ball sockets from your gas pedal to the rear carburetor, and that's a lot of slop. So we got to make sure our adjustments are independent of the throttle linkage. Now what we're going to do is we're going to check to see how much we're drawing on our first carburetor. And obviously I've already tuned these, but what we're doing is we've got, see the needle registers 8. I'll come over here. It's pretty sunny out here, so it's hard for me to see what I'm looking at in the camera. And, let's see. Alright, and we're running running 8 and a smidge right there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back off on the idle screw, about just a smidge of a turn, and we are right at 8. I'm going to back it off just a smidge more. You can see these things are very nicely machined, so that you get great response. Now then, the idle mixture screws have already been adjusted, but what you do with those, and you can readjust these to fit your particular engine. Okay, what we're going to do is the idle mixture screw right here What you do is you screw it in, you screw it out until you get the best running of the engine. And these are machined so nicely that we're talking about just a quarter of a turn or so will make a huge difference. And so I'm going to demonstrate what I'm talking about. You screw it in until the engine stumbles, screw it out until it stumbles, and you find your midpoint. Now we're starting to degrade our idle back to where we were. Starting to degrade back to our midpoint. Now, glad you do that on both carburetors, and it's going to depend on the efficiency of your engine. We did a compression test, and we're running 160, 165 on all 4 cylinders, so we got good engine. Now then, what you're going to do next is adjust all your linkage. I'll give you instructions at the length of the linkages, but this last one has got a turnbuckle. And what you're going to do with it is adjust it to where when you come in here, you snap this in place and nothing changes. And that is how you adjust these carburetors. And right now, got you at an idle of about 800, nope, 900 on the electronic. Let's see if we can, anyway, here's our idle, about 900. You guys can adjust it to whatever you like. And just for fun, here's what we'll do just for fun. Excuse the camera work for a minute. Alright. Now watch the needle here. We're running about not quite 850. I mean 875, 900. Let's see how low this thing will idle just for fun. There's 600. And all I'm doing is backing off on the idle screws, not the mixture screws, but just the idle settings. There's 500 RPM. There's, what's that, about 425? That's not too bad of an idle. Now we're just going to screw our screws back in, get back to where we're supposed to be. That's 650. Let's make it, should not, there's two suggested idle speeds in the shop manual. One's about 800, one's at 1,000. We'll do about 800 and see how that goes. And you guys can adjust as you so desire. That's bounce around 825. Alright, we got some really nice idling carburetors. we return, we got return to our idle. Now we'll do a hot start. Brandon, I would say these are really, really, really nice carburetors, and you guys should enjoy them. Thank you very much for your patience.